Welcome to the Mind Body Podcast, your rebellious podcast about a strong body, calm mind, healing, and fully living. I'm your host, Maria Angelova, creator of the Angelova Method, an integrative approach to mind and body connection. The Angelova Method redefines your success equation to include a healthy body and a healthy mind. Hi, Rebels. Welcome to the Mind Body Podcast, your rebellious podcast with me, your host, Maria, where it is all about a strong body, calm mind, healing, and fully living. And today, our special guest is Olivia Smith, who is a transformation expert, master certified professional coach, and founder of Write a New Story. I love that. Write a New Story. We're going to talk a lot more about that. But before that, Olivia, give us a chance to get to know you and give us 3 words that tell us who Olivia is.
Wow. Entrepreneur, determined, and giving back.
Giving back. Tell us a little bit more about those words. Obviously, entrepreneur, we'll get that.
So the entrepreneur part started 35 years ago, and the determination and then the giving back are part of, I guess, who I've become over the years based upon the earlier years. And as those have come along and built along, my desire to take now what I have learned through all of these years, pairing mistakes with successes and turning around and putting my hand out and hoping to pull this next generation along. And so that brings me to the giving back part. And that's sort of what I feel like I'm doing now with my consulting company.
And you said combining failures and successes. And may I restate that and say, combining lessons with successes.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
we don't think they're failures, they're opportunities for us to learn. And I was talking to a client this morning and she said something like, I don't know why this keeps happening. And I was like, because you're not getting the lesson. So
Right.
when you get the lesson,
Right.
that's is going to start happening. And I think that's easier to say sometimes from the outside than when you're in the midst of that. But let's talk about writing a new story. What does writing a new story mean? Because I will tell you, to me, it means something very personal, actually. But I'd love to know where the name of your company comes from, Olivia.
Well, as I looked back on after I had founded a nonprofit along my journey, and when I turned the leadership of the nonprofit over to a team of people, I then looked forward to see what my next part of my journey was going to look like. And it felt like all I had been doing my whole life was sort of writing new chapters. And so as the story continues to unfold, I just thought, I'm going to write a new story and open this consulting business and put some more chapters in the book. So that for me is the story is just a continuation of my journey, and then really turning back, like I said, and helping others move forward in their futures, writing new chapters in their story, and hopefully being able to leverage all they have learned and showing them how to turn all of the lessons they've learned to date into opportunities to continue to learn and be stronger and better.
Yeah, and we started talking about this a little bit before we pressed the recording button, but you made a very powerful statement, which was knowing yourself is the most valuable business asset, which I'll tell you, I went to business school, I have an MBA, and nobody in school ever told me that. And I kind of figured that out as I started my entrepreneurship journey. And actually, I found out that the real me was kind of buried underneath so many expectations, societal expectations, and what I should do and how I have to do it. And slowly started peeling those layers off and realizing the power of being yourself, the power of your true authenticity. So let's talk about that. Why do we not talk about that in business school? Like, why is there not a class on authenticity?
Well, that's an interesting question. I find a lot of, the way I sort of stumbled upon it was, again, from things that I had been aware of in my past in terms of my entrepreneurial journey, seeing the kind of leader I had been and then the kind of leader I wanted to become, and diving in more to the learning about myself and what that meant. And the form it's taken for me is I do behavioral assessment work, which is I use the DISC assessment. So I have people take an online assessment, which takes 10 minutes, and get the results back. And so every consulting client that I have, we start off with their DISC results and start diving into what does that say about who they are. And they quickly realize that the way they are out in the world leading their company, the way they're leading their personal life is all within their control. The problem is we don't ever stop long enough to really think about it. And so if we're trying to be out there starting businesses and leading people, and yet we're not aware of who we are and how we are putting ourselves out there in the world, we're just sort of blindly going out every day and doing things our way and not really stopping to think about how that might be impacting others positively or negatively. And so the problems that I find most companies are having are people problems, which is what I sort of go to work on. And the people problems, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it. The ugly way to say it is the fish stinks from the head down. So, when you walk into a company and you start sort of raise up the lid of the car and it's not so pretty underneath, you usually start with the business owner and say, okay, let's start with you and get you figured out and get kind of a better handle on who you are. And then we work outward from there to the key leadership teams and the staff underneath them. And so it's really, this work is not a light switch. Discovering who you are takes time. I work with a business owner over several months to really get our arms wrapped around who they are and really where they're going. Is the other thing I find so interesting is that a lot of people in business, they're self-starters, they're independent, they start companies, but they don't really have a clear vision of where they're going. They just have their heads down, they're working every day, but they don't have a clear vision of where they're trying to go. And so when you pair where you're trying to go with who you are, the first thing you want to say is that a match?
Right.
Going in a direction that suits you, that makes sense for you. Because what I find a lot of times is when you dig in and try to learn more about who the owner is, you find out that they're not playing necessarily to their strengths in the positions they're holding. And so even as owner of the company, shifting perhaps some of their job responsibilities, what they're doing during their day, delegating to others who maybe have a skill set that better suits some of the tasks the owner's doing, all of that sort of gets uncovered. And so once we can get the owner in a better position to play to their strengths and see their opportunities for growth, we start getting the engine sort of turned around in the right direction, and then we take it from there.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because I see it in the entrepreneurial community. Most entrepreneurs go after because they have a passion for something and they're hopefully good at that one thing that they do. However, they might lack the business skills to run a business. And I was talking to a client this morning, teaching Pilates is very different than owning and running a Pilates studio, right? They're two very different skill sets. And you don't really think about them when you're starting your journey. And that has big implications. Like I was doing some business coaching with a business owner, and I was asking some basic questions around the finances, what are revenues, what are margins? And she was like, I don't know. And I was like, wow, we got to get to the bottom of that before we can decide how we want to grow the business, where the opportunities are, where we can cut expense and so forth. But if you don't have those basics, and I think that goes back to what you said, knowing what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. So if finances are not your weaknesses, perhaps hire, a CPA or somebody who can handle your books and do that. And let's go back to the authenticity part. Is you mentioned it, you said it gracefully, where do you start with? You start with leadership. And just yesterday, I did a little live when I talked about, are you a company that encourages people to be who they are? And this way, you let them be innovative and creative and use the way that they think to get the most out of them? Or do you try to fit them into the box and say, this is how it is done, which actually does the exact opposite, does innovation, does the team spirit, kills morale, it's not. However, like you said, we don't stop and think about those things. And if you think about how many companies do restructuring, let people go, bring people in, we frequently miss that basic starting point of who are your employees, who do you want to have as employees, right? Because you just want to have anybody who has a resume to be an employee. Are they in alignment with your company values? Hopefully you know what your company values are, because are they in alignment with who you are? And it is such a powerful place to be when, one, you're in alignment with yourself as a leader, when the company values are in alignment with who you are, and then the team is in alignment with all of that. But that's a pretty complex thing, especially if you have a large team. What do you think about that?
Well, I love that. And you gave a great example of a Pilates instructor, opening a Pilates studio. Those two things couldn't be farther apart. One's a teacher, teaching students a skill, and one is running a company and running people and managing people. And those are such different skill sets. It doesn't mean that the Pilates instructor shouldn't open a studio, but it's going to take a very different set of skills for him or her to pull that off than it is if they just remained an instructor. So, and you brought up another point, which is who you surround yourself with as the leader. If you don't know who you are as the leader, then you can't figure out the kind of team you need to surround yourself with. You're just grabbing people. You're not hiring with intention. And so again, we always go back to who you are, what opportunities there are for you to grow, and what is it you want to do, and what does the company need to have done. The company requires certain things and certain roles to be filled. And so you get to choose as owner the roles you want to fill, hopefully based upon knowledge of who you are and where your strengths lie, and then surrounding yourself with people who complement those skills. And so that's where we get into doing the evaluations of the team members and making sure we've got them in the right seats on the bus. If you get a group of smart people, they can do anything. That's not the question. It's what should they be doing? What do they love doing? Pairing their passion with what they're good at. That's the formula we look for. So if we go through a job description review and then we look at the people and their DISC results, we're able to see, gosh, this is a really talented person and we've really got them in the wrong seat on the bus. Wouldn't they be much better over here?
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of work that we do to sort of strategize about the people in the organization, and making sure that we have all the people marching to the same vision in alignment with the owner's vision for where we're going as a company, and then making sure that the leaders and managers understand the people that they are leading. And so it's just, again, it's not a light switch, it's a process we take people through as we're evaluating all the members of the team to make sure that we've got people playing to their strengths and in the right seats.
I think you brought up a very key word, and that's one of my favorite words. So that's intention. So are you really, it's not just about your team, but are you intentional in everything that you do with your business, with the way you show up in the business every day, with who you attract in the business, with how intentional about your team's growth? There's so many things that you can be intentional about, especially when it gets to people's development. And very importantly, you brought up matching people with different skill sets, right? Maybe one person's strength is finance, the other one is creativity, like marketing. What is your thought on hiring people who do something a lot better than you? Because sometimes that can be intimidating, right? Oh, I'm the owner, I should be the best. Why do I hire somebody who is better than me? I think that's a brilliant strategy, but as a professional, what do you think about that?
Well, number one, I agree with you. It's a brilliant strategy, but it requires that you check your ego at the door. And the problem is entrepreneurs, if you look at most of the time, entrepreneur profiles are similar. They're hard driving, like to take charge, like to take chances, love risk. And those are usually larger egoed people. Not to generalize, but that's a pretty fair statement. And so to ask them to put smarter people in the room than they are And when they have to think about what that might feel like or look like, or how do I manage people that are smarter than I am, it's the greatest gift you can give your company, is to put people all around you who are smarter than you are and better than you are at certain things. But you're going to have a set of gifts that you're best at. And that's where you need to stay. And that's the lane you need to stay in, and pray that in your hiring, you can find people smarter than you are to fill those other slots, because that will take your company a lot farther down the road than you could have ever gotten it by yourself.
Imagine, yeah. I love that you brought up ego. I will tell you that's something that I've very much, we were actually talking about that at the group mindset call this week, about the ego and how having awareness of, is it my ego speaking or what's going on here? And I've become pretty good at listening, like, uh-oh, the ego is trying to take over. Because to me, the ego is our need for safety. And the ego is like trying to keep us boxed, because it's like, it's safe here, stay here. How can the ego, or how may the ego hurt you as a business owner, in your opinion?
Well, it blinds you. You know, if all you can see is your way and your assumptions are that you have all the answers, that's a hard way to be in business. That's a really hard way to be in business. The power comes from the collective and from the team surrounding you, embracing your vision and helping you get to where you're going. It's fine for you to have the vision, but the power comes from pairing that vision with a group of people that can surround you to help you make that vision come to light.
Yeah. What do you give as an advice to a business owner? Somebody asked me, oh, how do you know if it's the ego or not? And I do think you said it in the beginning. Sometimes we're so go, 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 we don't pause and think. And this is, the head is going on overdrive, the mind is going on overdrive, and we're trying to make decisions. Maybe we're emotionally wrapped up, unregulated, and we're trying to make decisions. And like you said, the ego thinks it's protecting you, but it's really putting blinders on your eyes. What do you tell to somebody who is like, I don't know if it's my ego or not? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, and you know, certainly I've had to learn some of these lessons over the years as well. I think the most powerful thing I've been working on recently is taking time to think about something. Entrepreneurs are usually quick decision makers. They don't stew a whole lot about problems. They just blow and go and make decisions. And I'm finding that taking that 24 hours, if you have the luxury of taking 24 hours to think about something before you act, you can usually sort through a good bit in 24 hours in your head. And typically, when you look back at how you felt about something 24 hours before, you sometimes feel completely differently in only 24 hours. So think about how you might feel if you took 2 or 3 days to think about it. So things start settling down, your brain gets a little air going, and it has time to breathe and let some breath come around that, whatever the issue is that you're thinking about. And I would say usually within 24 to 48 hours, you can get a handle on, is this my ego talking, you know, or not? And I think just breathing and taking that time, self-reflection is difficult.
Yes, but I love it. That's what I say. You have to self-reflect, pause, and
self-awareness, self-reflection for people who are usually on the go and making things happen. Self-reflection is not our friend. At least we don't practice it very much. So again, taking that 24 hours to really reflect on yourself, what the issue is, be honest. I think the very first thing is being honest about the issue. Take the blinders off, get real with yourself, what's really going on, and then evaluate it with that 24 to 48 hour window of time wrapped around it, and see if you can't make a more informed decision after you've given it a little time to really self-reflect and be honest with yourself.
This is a
Don't
perfect
see it for what you want it to be, see it for what it really is.
This is the perfect place for me to plug in self-care, because you actually said self-awareness is not our friend. I actually think it's a big friend of ours. We just have to friend it and learn how to treat it as a friend. And I mean, that's what I do when I was just dealing with something last week, and I was like, is this my ego? Like, what's going on? And I journaled and I did meditation. Yep. I went for a walk outside to just completely step away so that I can objectively look at what's happening, versus when I'm in a panic mode or I feel like there is pressure and something has to be decided. And it's a much more responsive way to manage a business too, rather than reactive.
Right.
And I wanted to say something else. What else did you say? Something. It's so funny. I usually count the things that I want to make comments on. So I know I had 2 comments, but I don't remember my second one.
That's okay.
So Olivia, let's see, if you were to give business owners a piece of advice based on your work and how you help business owners and leaders, what would be a couple of pieces of advice you have for us?
Well, I think the main piece of advice is your people are looking to you. They're looking at you. They're looking to you for leadership, guidance, approval, acceptance, all of those things. They're looking to you for many things. And so if you have not stepped back and done any self-reflecting on who you are and how you're putting yourself out there to your business, to your peers, to the people that you're leading, I would recommend some sort of behavioral assessment. If you can find someone that can do that for you, and spend some time really digging in. My process involves an hour debrief session with the assessment results. And that's really where we pull back the curtain and say, okay, here's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here's who you are naturally. Here's how you're showing up at work. What's happening? And we just start the conversation and we really unplug for that hour and really try to do that, setting the ego aside, looking at the results honestly, going through them, seeing what they mean, and then really making an action plan based upon what we find. What changes would you like to make? What do you think would make you be seen more openly, more honestly? What behaviors would you like to change in order for your staff to be able to fully get on board with your vision and be able to communicate in the way you'd like them to? It all starts with you and goes from there. So I strongly recommend leaders get in touch with, and it's not touchy-feely work. I know some people avoid it because they think it's going to be that's not what it is at all. It's just a real picture of who you are, how you're changing when you get to work, and how that's impacting really your business. And it impacts the bottom line because, for instance, if you're having a lot of turnover, you got to start with you and think about, am I doing something as owner to have created a culture where people don't seem to want to stay? And that work has to start with you and an evaluation of you and what's your part in the culture that's been created. And so if you want the culture to look differently, you've got to look at yourself differently and look differently at how look differently and honestly about how you are impacting your culture as the owner, and start the work there. And then it goes from there.
Yeah. So 2 things is, the first one, I know what was my first comment was, and you brought it up again, and that is being honest with yourself. And I think that's something so important. Because like in the context of self-care, I tell people, listen, you can make all the excuses and give me all the reasons that you're not doing self-care, and that is fine. But what you need to ask yourself is, how is that serving you? Because it's really impacting you. It's not impacting me, right? So are you being honest with yourself with what you're saying? And is that really true? And then you brought up a good point. You said some people think it's touchy-feely. And I will tell you the type of work I do, it's a little bit more touchy-feely. That would be touchy-feely because I use the body and what you're experiencing, the body, the tension, the tightness. What is your thought about vulnerability in the whole process? Because I think that's a big part of it too. Also allowing your employees or your team or colleagues or whoever it is to also see you as a human who doesn't have all the answers and who sometimes needs help. I mean, asking for help, speaking of type A personalities who have big egos, that is usually not a strength for a lot of leaders to be comfortable asking for help and receiving help. What is your thought on vulnerability? Because I'm all for that. What do you think?
Well, I think for a lot of people, being honest feels like being vulnerable, which is why they don't maybe do it, is because they're scared. Really, it's all fear-based. What's really going on is they're afraid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I admit this, then what's that going to mean?
Mm-hmm.
If I own this, what is that going to mean? It's easier just to keep going. It's easier just to ignore it. It's easier not to deal with it.
Yeah.
But if you're honest and you, like I said, raise the lid of the car and things aren't so pretty, we're great at making things pretty on the outside, but when we lift up the lid and see that things really aren't so pretty with us, with our company, with our employees, that's, what that's going to mean? That's going to mean I've got to start doing some work I don't really want to do.
Yeah.
Because you know what? That work's hard. That's not a checkbox. That's hard work. And so we avoid it. We're afraid of it. We quote unquote don't have time for it.
Yeah.
So we just keep going and making the same, on the same path that we're going down. And it just, it's a shame because this work is so impactful. It's actually fun. People love it when they dive into it, but you can feel the fear in the beginning because, it feels a little vulnerable. It feels a little like I may have to talk about myself a little bit. I may have to admit some things I don't want to admit.
Yes.
But that's really where the fun begins because the results that we go over, oh my gosh, there's so much opportunity. That's the fun part. It's not weaknesses. It's not anything bad. Every time I look at a report, all I see is opportunity. All I see is opportunity for growth, for courage, for stepping in to areas they've not been in before. I mean, it's just packed with opportunity, but you have to get over push the fear aside, push the ego aside, be a little vulnerable, and then dive in, and it's just fun.
Yeah, and I think step into who you really are, because I do think we're not taught to be our authentic self, and being your authentic self can be scary. Because what if you don't fit in, and what are people going to say, and what are people going to think? And what we don't realize is that when you step into your authenticity, you're really stepping into your power. And I can keep talking to you, obviously, but you mentioned kind of looking at the same thing with different views, right? Is that a weakness or is that an opportunity? Just doing some business coaching, and my client was like, oh my gosh, all this fear is creeping up from what the numbers are. And I'm like, don't look at it like that. Look at these numbers are showing me where are my opportunities, right? Absolutely. This is where my revenues can go up. This is where my expense can go down. Like, it's pointing you. So you can freak out about what it is, or you can take it for what it is and make the most out of it and let it drive you towards action to help you propel your company to the next level. Same numbers.
Yeah, whether it's yourself you're talking about or your numbers, it doesn't matter. It all has to do with being honest about your numbers, being honest about where you are right now. Again, people don't do budgets. The number one reason people don't do a budget is because they know the budget's going to be wrong. They're afraid to be wrong. Budgets are 100% of the time they're wrong. 100% of the time they're wrong. That doesn't mean we don't do it. You have children. 100% of the time when you're raising children, you're going to make mistakes. 100% of the time. That doesn't mean you don't have children.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just the attitude we have. And people show up at work when we look at the graphs that show who they are naturally and then what their graph is when they show up at work. The work graph is talking about who you think you're supposed to be when you walk in the door at work. It's your perception of who you're supposed to be when you get to work. And so many times when I see these big shifts between who they are naturally and what their work graph shows, I ask the question, what's going on? Why do you think this is, you're needing to change this much when you get into your workspace? And they have all sorts of reasons, but it comes down to, well, did somebody tell you you needed to be that way? Is your boss pushing you to be that? No. They're doing it to themselves.
Yeah. And
so getting them to realize, for the job you're doing, I don't really feel like this is necessary. It looks like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself that's not really, it's not serving you. Nobody's making you feel that way. Nobody's pushing you into that box. You're doing that to yourself. And I think if you move back towards being a little more of who you really are, You're going to be happier. You're probably going to do a better job at work.
Yeah.
And the pressure's going to be relieved. And you're not going to be living this lie, like trying to be somebody you're just not. You do a great job. Take the pressure off.
Yeah. It goes back to the stories that we write and we believe them when there is no truth to them.
Right.
It takes me to my next question. What is your definition of rebellious, Olivia?
Of what?
Of rebellious.
Rebellious. Ooh, I've never been asked that before. I think I would say not accepting the status quo.
Yeah, I like that.
Challenging the status quo.
The status quo. Yeah.
Sometimes you may be wrong when you rebel. Sometimes you may be right.
Yeah. I think it's really challenging this. For me, it was challenging the status quo and staying true to yourself, to what we were just talking about, regardless of what everybody else has to say. So, yeah, very cool. Olivia, where can people follow you, connect with you, social media, websites?
Yes, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn is Write a New Story, WRITE, Write a New Story. And my website is writeanewstory.com. Would love to have you visit the website. There's a quiz on the website, a 2-question quiz that if you take that, it gives you a little information about probably which DISC assessment style you are. So if you'd like to learn more of that, connect with me through the website or LinkedIn, and I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Olivia, appreciate all the insight you shared with us today. Rebels, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Make sure to follow and connect with Olivia. If you know a business leader who might be wanting to grow or see better results, share this episode. And as always, remember to stay rebellious. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Did you enjoy the conversation? Like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Want to redefine your success equation to include a healthy body and a healthy mind? Check out our website at rebellious-studio.com.